Canine, dog refuses order to stand down. What he smelled on the elderly man's jacket changed everything. What happened next will shock you to your core. A police dog's refusal to follow orders uncovered a secret that had been buried for almost 40 years. If you like this story, hit that like button, share it with your friends, and let me know in the comments where you're listening from. The story you're about to listen to starts on what seemed like the most ordinary Tuesday morning you could imagine. Officer Marcus Reed adjusted his radio as he walked the familiar gravel path around Maplewood Park. The October sun filtered through golden leaves, casting long shadows across the empty playground. His partner Rex, a German shepherd with graying fur around his muzzle, trotted beside him with the confident stride of a dog who had seen it all. Rex was technically retired, but Marcus couldn't bring himself to leave his old partner at home. They'd been together for 8 years, through drug busts, missing person cases, and more late nights than either of them cared to count. "Just another quiet morning patrol, boy," Marcus murmured, scratching behind Rex's ears. The dog's tail wagged once, then he returned his attention to the path ahead. It was 7:23 a.m. when they first saw him. An elderly man sat alone on the bench near the duck pond, feeding breadcrumbs to a small group of mallards. He wore a thick brown jacket despite the mild weather, and his silver hair was neatly combed back. There was something almost too perfect about the scene, like a painting someone might hang in a doctor's waiting room. Marcus nodded politely as they approached. "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" The man looked up with pale blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. His face was weathered, but kind, the sort of grandfather you'd see pushing kids on swings or teaching them to fish. "Oh yes, officer. I come here every morning. The ducks, they know me now." His voice carried a faint accent that Marcus couldn't quite place. European, maybe. The man's hands were spotted with age, but they moved with surprising steadiness as he scattered another handful of crumbs. "I'm Officer Reed, and this is Rex." Marcus watched as the stranger's eyes lingered on the dog. Something flickered across his face. Recognition, maybe, or concern. "Harold Webb," the man replied, extending a weathered hand. "Pleasure to meet you both." Rex had been sitting calmly at Marcus's heel, but as Harold stood to shake hands, something changed. The dog's ears pricked forward, then flattened back against his head. A low rumble started deep in his chest. "Rex, what's wrong?" Marcus's hand instinctively moved to the dog's head, but Rex stepped forward, his nose working the air with intense focus. Harold took a small step back. Perhaps he doesn't like strangers. Some dogs are that way. But Marcus knew Rex better than that. In 8 years, his partner had never shown aggression toward an innocent civilian. The dog's posture had shifted completely. Weight forward, muscles tense, every instinct on high alert. "Stand down, Rex." Marcus's voice carried the authority of years of training. "Easy, boy." Rex didn't obey. Instead, he moved closer to Harold, his growl deepening. The sound was unlike anything Marcus had heard from his partner before. Not the warning bark they used for suspects, but something primal and urgent. "I should probably get going," Harold said, his voice suddenly tight. He turned to leave, but Rex lunged forward, his teeth catching the hem of Harold's jacket. "Rex, no!" Marcus grabbed for the dog's collar, but Rex was stronger than his graying muzzle suggested. He pulled hard, and the sound of tearing fabric cut through the morning air. Harold stumbled backward, his face pale. "Your dog, he's—" "Rex, stand down! That's an order!" Marcus had never had to shout at his partner before. Other park visitors were starting to stare, pulling out phones, whispering to each other. But Rex ignored every command. He had torn a small piece of fabric from the jacket's inner lining, and now he was focused on that fragment with laser intensity. His growl had changed again. Not aggressive anymore, but desperate, almost pleading. Marcus finally managed to pull Rex back, wrapping both arms around the dog's chest. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Webb. He's never done anything like this before. Are you hurt?" Harold was examining the tear in his jacket, his hands shaking slightly. The damage was minimal, just a small rip near the bottom hem, but something about his reaction seemed off. His breathing was shallow, and those pale blue eyes kept darting between Marcus and Rex. It's fine. Just an old jacket anyway." Harold's voice had lost that grandfatherly warmth. Now it sounded forced, like someone reading lines from a script they hadn't properly memorized. Rex was still straining against Marcus's hold, whining now instead of growling. The sound was heartbreaking, like a dog trying to speak but lacking the words. Let me at least pay for the repair, Marcus offered, though he was more focused on his partner's behavior than on making small talk. In all their years together, Rex had never disobeyed a direct command. Never. No need, really. Harold was already backing away, clutching the jacket closed where it had torn. I should get home. My medication, you know. Need to take it on schedule. There was something about the way he said medication that made Marcus's cop instincts twinge. But before he could ask any follow-up questions, Harold was walking quickly toward the park exit, moving faster than seemed comfortable for a man his age. Rex watched him go, every muscle in his body still coiled with tension. When Harold finally disappeared behind a line of trees, the dog sat down heavily and looked up at Marcus with an expression that was almost human in its frustration. What the hell was that about, boy? Marcus crouched down to Rex's level, studying his partner's face. The dog's eyes were alert, focused, like he was trying to communicate something vital. Marcus looked down at his hands and realized he was still holding the small piece of torn fabric. It was brown, matching the jacket, but there was something odd about the texture. He held it closer to his nose and caught a faint chemical smell, sharp and medicinal, but not like any cleaning product he recognized. Rex whined again, pressing his nose against the fabric fragment. You smell something, don't you? Marcus carefully folded the piece of cloth and slipped it into an evidence bag from his belt. It was probably nothing. Maybe Harold had spilled some medication on his jacket, or used some kind of old-fashioned mothball treatment. But Rex's reaction had been so extreme, so unlike anything in their shared history. They finished their patrol route, but Marcus's mind kept returning to the encounter. Rex remained on edge for the rest of the morning, stopping frequently to sniff the air and looking back toward the pond where they'd met Harold Webb. When they returned to the station, Marcus ran Harold's name through the system. Clean record, no warrants, no red flags. Harold Webb, 73 years old, lived alone in a small house on Elm Street about 2 miles from the park. Widower, no children, retired postal worker. On paper, he was exactly what he appeared to be, a harmless old man feeding ducks in the park. But Rex had never been wrong about people, not once. Marcus spent his lunch break researching Rex's behavior, scrolling through articles about police dog training and canine senses. Dogs could detect diseases, drugs, explosives, even changes in human emotion through scent. Their noses were thousands of times more sensitive than human noses, capable of picking up traces of substances that would be completely undetectable to people. What had Rex smelled on Harold Webb's jacket? That evening, Marcus sat in his living room, with Rex curled up beside him on the couch. The dog seemed calmer now, but every so often he would lift his head and sniff the air, as if expecting to catch that same scent again. "Talk to me, boy," Marcus said, scratching behind Rex's ears. "What did you smell on that old man?" Rex's response was to rest his head on Marcus's lap and let out a long, troubled sigh. Marcus pulled out the evidence bag containing the fabric fragment. Even through the plastic, he could detect that faint chemical odor. He'd submit it for analysis in the morning, though he wasn't sure what he'd tell the lab. "My dog freaked out when he smelled this wasn't exactly standard procedure." His phone buzzed with a text from his partner, Dave. "Heard you had an incident at the park today. Everything okay?" Word traveled fast in a small police department. Marcus typed back, "Rex had a weird reaction to some old guy. Probably nothing." But as he looked down at his retired canine partner, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that it was something important. Rex had spent years finding hidden drugs, locating missing people, detecting explosives. His nose had saved lives, solved cases, and never led them astray. If Rex thought Harold Webb was dangerous, then Harold Webb was dangerous. The question was, dangerous how? Marcus made a mental note to drive by Harold's house tomorrow during his patrol, just to check on the elderly man, make sure he was feeling all right after the morning's incident. It was the neighborly thing to do. Rex lifted his head and looked directly at Marcus, as if he could read his partner's thoughts. For just a moment, Marcus could have sworn he saw approval in those dark, intelligent eyes. The next morning arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of October weather that made everyone want to stay in bed a little longer. Marcus and Rex were back at Maplewood Park by 7:15, following their usual route but with heightened awareness. Marcus found himself scanning the benches and pathways, looking for Harold Webb's familiar figure. The duck pond was empty except for the waterfowl themselves, who seemed to be waiting for their regular breakfast provider. Marcus checked his watch, 7:30. Yesterday, Harold had been there by this time. "Maybe he's running late," Marcus murmured to Rex, but the dog seemed uninterested in the ducks. Instead, he kept pulling toward the bench where they'd encountered Harold the day before. At the bench, Rex began sniffing intensively, his nose working in small circles around the wooden seat and backrest. His tail was rigid, every line of his body focused on whatever traces Harold had left behind. Marcus waited patiently, knowing better than to interrupt when Rex was working. After several minutes, the dog sat down and looked up at his partner with that same frustrated expression from yesterday. "He was here, wasn't he?" Marcus said, "but something's different." They continued their patrol, but Marcus found his attention drifting to Elm Street. Harold's house wasn't far from their usual route. It wouldn't hurt to drive by just to make sure the elderly man was all right. Number 247 Elm Street was a modest single-story home with blue shutters and a small front garden that had seen better days. The lawn needed mowing, and several newspapers lay scattered on the front porch. Harold's brown sedan sat in the driveway, but the house had that empty feeling that comes with absence. Marcus parked across the street and studied the property. Everything looked normal, but something felt off. Maybe it was the accumulated newspapers, or the way the curtains were drawn tight against the morning light. Or maybe it was Rex, who had gone rigid in the passenger seat, his nose pressed against the partially open window. A neighbor emerged from the house next door, an elderly woman in a pink bathrobe walking to retrieve her own newspaper. Marcus rolled down his window. "Excuse me, ma'am. I'm Officer Reed. I was wondering if you'd seen Mr. Webb today. Harold Webb, from next door?" The woman approached the patrol car, squinting at Marcus through thick glasses. "Harold? No, I haven't seen him since... Oh, must be 2 days now, which is odd because he's usually out working in his garden every morning. Very punctual man, our Harold. Has he seemed okay lately? Any health problems or unusual behavior?" She considered this, wrapping her bathrobe tighter against the morning chill. "Well, now that you mention it, he did seem a bit agitated yesterday evening. I saw him through my kitchen window, pacing around his living room. And he had several phone calls. I could hear his voice through the walls, though I couldn't make out the words. Sounded upset about something." Marcus thanked her and rolled up the window, his unease growing. Harold had seemed nervous after the incident with Rex, but agitated phone calls and missed routines suggested something more than embarrassment about a torn jacket. Rex whined softly, pressing his nose harder against the window glass. "You want to get closer, don't you?" Marcus looked at his partner, then at Harold's house. They had no warrant, no probable cause, no legal reason to investigate further, but they also had a missing elderly man and a dog who had never been wrong about danger. Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He got out of the patrol car and walked up to Harold's front door, Rex at his side. The accumulated newspapers were dated from today and yesterday, confirming that Harold hadn't been outside for at least 24 hours. Marcus knocked firmly on the door. "Mr. Webb, it's Officer Reed from yesterday. I wanted to make sure you were feeling all right." No response. He knocked again, louder this time. "Harold, are you okay in there?" Silence. Rex was sniffing around the base of the door, his behavior increasingly agitated. Suddenly, he began pawing at the doorframe, whining urgently. Marcus tried the doorknob, locked, as expected. But as he leaned closer to the door, he caught a smell that made his stomach drop. The same chemical odor from the fabric fragment, but stronger now, much stronger. And underneath it, something else. Something that made Rex's behavior suddenly, terrifyingly clear. The metallic smell of blood. Marcus immediately called for backup and medical assistance, his hands shaking as he spoke into his radio. Rex was in full alert mode now, circling the house and barking at specific windows. Every instinct told Marcus that they were too late, that whatever had happened to Harold Webb had happened hours ago. But Rex's nose told a different story. Beneath the sense of chemicals and blood, the dog had detected something else. Something that suggested this wasn't as simple as an elderly man having a medical emergency in his home. Rex had found evidence. Again. The question was, evidence of what? Within minutes, backup units arrived along with paramedics and Detective Sarah Chen, a sharp-eyed investigator who had worked with Marcus on several cases. The front door was forced open, revealing Harold's modest living room frozen in time. A half-eaten breakfast sat on the kitchen table, morning coffee still in the cup, but long cold. The newspaper lay open to the crossword puzzle, with only 3 words filled in. But Harold Webb was nowhere to be found. Rex immediately began working the scene, his nose leading him through the house in a systematic pattern that Marcus had seen countless times before. The dog paused at the kitchen table, sniffed the coffee cup, then moved toward the back hallway. His behavior was focused, but agitated. The scent trail was there, but something about it was wrong. No signs of forced entry, Detective Chen reported, examining the front door lock, and no obvious signs of struggle, but that smell. Marcus nodded grimly. The chemical odor was stronger inside the house, concentrated in the living room near Harold's favorite chair. Rex kept returning to that spot, whining and pawing at the carpet. "It's the same smell from yesterday," Marcus explained, pulling out the evidence bag containing the fabric fragment. Rex reacted to Harold's jacket, tore off a piece. "I had a feeling something was off." Chen examined the fabric through the plastic bag. "Good instincts. This needs to go to the lab immediately." She paused, watching Rex work. "What's he telling us?" Rex had moved to the back door, which led to a small fenced yard. He was scratching at the door frame, his whines becoming more urgent. When Chen opened the door, Rex bolted outside and began circling the yard, nose to the ground. The backyard was unremarkable. A patch of grass, a small garden shed, a few fruit trees. But Rex was focused on an area near the back fence where the grass looked slightly disturbed. Marcus knelt down and noticed that the soil beneath the grass was darker, as if it had been recently turned over. "Sarah," Marcus called softly, "you need to see this." Detective Chen joined him, and together they examined the disturbed ground. It wasn't a large area, maybe 3 feet by 2 feet, but it was definitely intentional. Someone had dug here recently, then tried to cover their tracks by replacing the sod. Rex sat beside the spot and looked up at Marcus with an expression that clearly said, "This is it. This is what you need to find." "We need the crime scene unit," Chen said, already reaching for her radio, "and a search warrant for the whole property." While they waited for the forensics team, Marcus found himself studying Harold's house with new eyes. The man had lived here for over 20 years, according to the neighbor, but there were surprisingly few personal touches. No family photos, no knickknacks from travels, no evidence of hobbies or interests beyond the basic necessities of life. For a retired postal worker, Harold had lived a remarkably anonymous existence. Chen emerged from the bedroom holding a small wooden box. Found this hidden in the back of his closet. It was locked, but she showed Marcus the broken latch. Sometimes police work requires creative problem solving. Inside the box were items that made Marcus's blood run cold. A child's sneaker, small and worn, with cartoon characters on the side. A plastic action figure, the kind every kid had in the 1980s. And underneath everything else, a birth certificate that was partially burned around the edges, but still readable. The name on the certificate was Tommy Rivers, born March 15, 1907. The child would be 47 now, if he was still alive. "This doesn't match any missing person cases in our jurisdiction," Chen said, photographing each item carefully. "But that doesn't mean much. Kids went missing all the time in the 80s, and not all cases were properly documented or shared between departments." Marcus stared at the child's sneaker, remembering Rex's desperate behavior from the day before. "You think Harold was involved in something?" "I think Harold Webb wasn't who he claimed to be," Chen replied grimly, "and I think your partner knew it." The forensics team arrived and began processing the scene systematically. The disturbed ground in the backyard yielded nothing immediately obvious, but soil samples were taken for analysis. The chemical smell throughout the house was strongest in the living room and Harold's bedroom, suggesting prolonged exposure to whatever substance had soaked into his jacket. Rex remained close to Marcus throughout the investigation, but his behavior had changed. The desperate urgency from yesterday had been replaced by a different kind of alertness. The way he acted when they were close to solving a case, but hadn't quite put all the pieces together yet. "Officer Reed," one of the forensics technicians called from the kitchen, "you might want to see this." Behind Harold's refrigerator, barely visible unless you knew where to look, someone had carved letters into the wall. They were small and crude, like a child might make with a sharp object when no one was watching. Tommy Rivers. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Tommy Rivers had been in this house. The question was when, and what had happened to him after he left those desperate letters behind. "We need to expand the search," Chen said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Check missing children databases going back to the 70s. Cross-reference with Harold Webb's employment history, places he lived, any connection to children's services or youth programs." As the investigation continued, Marcus found himself thinking about Harold's reaction the day before. The man had seemed genuinely confused when Rex attacked his jacket, but there had been something else in his eyes, recognition, maybe, or fear. like he knew exactly why the dog was reacting that way. Evening was falling by the time the crime scene team finished their initial processing. Harold Webb was still missing, and with each passing hour, the likelihood of finding him alive decreased. But Rex's behavior suggested that Harold's disappearance wasn't the real mystery here. The real mystery was what had happened in this house over the years, and how many children might have passed through Harold's life. Detective Chen pulled Marcus aside as they prepared to leave. "I've been doing some preliminary research on Harold Webb. His background is almost too clean, like someone created a perfect identity and then lived it for decades. No traffic tickets, no medical records before 1985, no credit history before that date. It's like Harold Webb didn't exist before he moved to this town." "You think it's a false identity?" "I think Harold Webb is a very dangerous man who's been hiding in plain sight for almost 40 years, Chen said grimly. "And somehow, your dog figured it out in 30 seconds. That night, Marcus sat in his living room with Rex curled up beside him, both of them troubled by the day's discoveries. The child's belongings haunted him. That small sneaker, the action figure, the desperately carved letters behind the refrigerator. How many other children had there been? How long had Harold been operating under everyone's noses? Rex lifted his head suddenly, ears pricked, and padded to the front window. Marcus followed, expecting to see a raccoon or stray cat in the yard. Instead, he saw a familiar brown sedan parked across the street, engine running. Harold Webb sat behind the wheel, staring directly at Marcus's house. For a moment, the two men looked at each other through the glass. Harold's face was pale in the streetlight, his expression unreadable. Then he put the car in drive and slowly pulled away, disappearing into the night. Marcus immediately called Chen and reported the sighting, but by the time patrol units reached the area, Harold was gone. The manhunt that had been informal became official. Harold Webb was now a person of interest in multiple potential crimes, and every officer in the county had his description and license plate number. But Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that Harold hadn't been there to threaten them. He'd been there to say goodbye. The next morning brought answers that raised even more questions. The fabric fragment from Harold's jacket tested positive for chloroform and traces of other sedatives, drugs commonly used to incapacitate victims. The soil samples from the backyard showed no human remains, but they did contain chemical residues consistent with cleaning products used to dissolve organic matter. Most disturbing of all, the database search had turned up 17 missing children from across 3 states, spanning from 1978 to 94, all of them connected by a single thread. Harold Webb, or men matching his description, had been present in each location during the time frame when the children disappeared. "He's been doing this for decades," Chen explained to Marcus in the conference room, spreading out files and photographs. "Different names, different towns, but always the same pattern. He establishes himself as a quiet, harmless, elderly man, sometimes a janitor at a school, sometimes a volunteer at youth programs, sometimes just the friendly neighbor who offers to help single mothers with yard work." Marcus studied the faces of the missing children, boys and girls between ages 6 and 12. All of them vanished without a trace. No bodies ever found, no witnesses, no evidence. Just children who walked out of their lives one day and never came home. "The question is, where are they now?" Marcus said quietly. "Are any of them still alive?" "That's what we need to find out," Chen replied. "And I think the answer might be in Harold's past. We're working with federal agents now. This crosses state lines and involves multiple jurisdictions. But Marcus, I need you to know that you and Rex might have saved lives yesterday. If Harold was planning to take another child..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. They both understood what Rex's intervention had prevented. Rex himself seemed to understand the gravity of what they'd uncovered. He stayed close to Marcus throughout the briefings and strategy sessions, his usual playful demeanor replaced by the serious focus of a working dog who knew lives depended on his abilities. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Harold's neighbor, the elderly woman in the pink bathrobe, called the police station with information she'd forgotten to mention earlier. "I remembered something about those phone calls Harold was making," she told Chen over the phone, her voice shaking slightly. "I couldn't hear most of what he was saying, but there was one thing he kept repeating. A name, I think. He kept saying Riverside, or River something, and he sounded scared. Rivers, like Tommy Rivers, the name on the burned birth certificate." Chen immediately began searching for locations with river in the name. Riverside Drive, River Valley, River Brook. There were dozens of possibilities within a 100-mile radius of Harold's house, but one stood out. Riverdale Youth Ranch, a now-defunct therapeutic facility for troubled children that had operated in the mountains about 60 miles north of town. The ranch had been shut down in '95 following allegations of abuse and misconduct. Most of the records had been sealed or destroyed, but Chen managed to track down a former employee who agreed to meet with investigators. Margaret Sims had been a nurse at Riverdale for 3 years in the early '90s. She was in her 70s now, living in a retirement community 2 hours away, but her memory of those years was crystal clear. That place was evil, she told Marcus and Chen, her hands shaking as she poured tea in her small apartment. They called it therapy, but what they did to those children, I tried to report it, but nobody listened. The authorities, the state agencies, they all turned a blind eye because the ranch had connections, political protection. What kind of connections? Chen asked gently. Wealthy people who donated money, politicians who sent their own troubled kids there quietly, and the staff. Some of them weren't there to help children. They were there because they enjoyed having power over vulnerable kids. Margaret pulled out an old photograph, yellowed with age. It showed the ranch's staff gathered in front of a large wooden building. I kept this as evidence, in case anyone ever wanted to investigate properly. Marcus studied the faces in the photo, and his blood ran cold. There, in the back row, was a much younger Harold Webb, but the nameplate in front of him read, Dr. Henry Walsh, child psychologist. Dr. Walsh ran the therapeutic program, Margaret continued. He was supposed to be helping traumatized children overcome their problems. Instead, he was conducting experiments on them, mind control techniques, drug treatments, behavioral modification through methods I can't even describe. What happened to the children? Marcus asked, though he dreaded the answer. Some of them were returned to their families eventually, but they were different. Broken. Others just disappeared from the ranch records. Walsh would claim they had been transferred to other facilities, but there was never any paperwork, never any follow-up. I think he was selling them. The room fell silent except for the ticking of Margaret's antique clock. Rex, who had been lying quietly at Marcus's feet, lifted his head and whined softly. There's something else, Margaret said, her voice barely above a whisper. The ranch had a network. Other facilities, private homes, people who would take the children Walsh was finished with. It wasn't just one madman, it was an organized operation. Chen leaned forward. Do you know where any of these other locations might be? There was talk of a place in the woods, somewhere isolated where they could continue their work without interference. The staff called it the sanctuary. Children who went there never came back. As they drove back toward town, Marcus's mind raced with the implications of what they'd learned. Harold Webb, or Henry Walsh, wasn't just a predator who had taken children. He was part of a larger network that had been operating for decades, moving children from facility to facility, experimenting on them, using them for purposes too horrible to contemplate. And somehow, Rex had sensed all of this from a few seconds of sniffing Harold's jacket. We need to find this sanctuary, Chen said, her jaw set with determination. If there are survivors, if any of those children are still alive, they've been waiting 40 years for someone to find them, Marcus finished. Rex pressed his nose against the car window, watching the forest roll past. Somewhere out there, in those dark woods, were answers that would finally bring justice for Tommy Rivers and all the other children who had vanished into Harold's web of evil. The question was, would they find the answers in time? What do you think happened to all those missing children? Share your theories in the comments below. The search for Harold Webb intensified over the next 48 hours, but it was as if the man had vanished into thin air. His car was found abandoned at a truck stop 30 miles away, keys still in the ignition, but security cameras showed no sign of Harold himself. It was as though he had simply walked away from his life and disappeared into the shadows. Marcus spent those 2 days reviewing every piece of evidence they'd collected, looking for clues that might lead them to the mysterious sanctuary that Margaret Sims had mentioned. Rex seemed to sense the urgency, staying close to Marcus's side and occasionally whining softly when the investigation stalled. On Thursday morning, Marcus received a call that changed everything. Officer Reed, this is Eleanor Hayes. I used to work for the State Children's Services Department back in the 80s. The woman's voice was elderly but strong, with the authority of someone accustomed to being listened to. I saw the news report about Harold Webb, and I think I have information you need. Marcus grabbed a pen and notepad. I'm listening, Mrs. Hayes. Dr. Henry Walsh. That's who you're really looking for, isn't it? I handled emergency placements back then, and I remember him well. Too well. Eleanor's voice carried decades of regret. There was a child, a little boy named Tommy Rivers, 7 years old when his parents died in a car accident. No other family, so he became a ward of the state. Marcus's heart began racing. What happened to Tommy? Walsh had contracts with Children's Services. He ran what was supposed to be a therapeutic facility for traumatized children. The paperwork was always perfect, the references impeccable. State inspectors would visit and see happy, well-adjusted kids participating in art therapy and group sessions. But, Marcus prompted when Eleanor paused. I placed Tommy at Walsh's facility in September of 1984. 6 months later, when I went for a follow-up visit, Walsh told me Tommy had been transferred to a specialized program in another state. He had documentation, transfer papers, everything looked legitimate, but something felt wrong. Eleanor's voice began to shake. I tried to follow up, to contact the facility where Tommy had supposedly been transferred, but the phone numbers were disconnected. The addresses led to empty buildings. It was like the boy had simply vanished from existence. Did you report this? I tried, but Walsh had powerful friends, and I was just a social worker asking uncomfortable questions. My supervisor told me to drop it, that Walsh's program had excellent success rates, and I was jeopardizing important relationships. When I kept pushing, they transferred me to a different department. Marcus felt a familiar chill. Mrs. Hayes, do you remember anything specific about Walsh's facility? Any details that might help us locate it? It wasn't the main ranch that everyone knew about. Walsh had a secondary location, something he called his intensive therapy retreat. It was supposed to be for children who needed more specialized treatment, but the kids who went there, they never came back to the main facility. Walsh always had explanations. They'd been reunited with distant relatives or transferred to long-term care facilities, but the explanations were always vague. Where was this secondary location? Somewhere in the Silver Grove National Forest, remote, isolated. Walsh said it was important for the children to be away from outside distractions while they healed. But now, I think, Eleanor's voice broke, I think he was hiding them from people who might ask questions. Silver Grove National Forest. Marcus knew the area, thousands of acres of dense woodland, mountains and valleys, where someone could hide almost anything. If Walsh had been operating a facility out there, it would explain how he had managed to keep his activities secret for so long. Mrs. Hayes, is there anything else you remember? Any other details that might help us find this place? There was one thing. Walsh mentioned it once, almost like he was bragging. He said his retreat was built on an old mining claim, that the isolation was perfect because the nearest road was miles away. And he talked about having special accommodations for children who needed long-term care. After ending the call, Marcus immediately contacted Detective Chen and the federal agents who had joined the investigation. Within hours, they had teams searching property records for the Silver Grove area, looking for any connection to Walsh or his various identities. Rex seemed to sense that they were getting closer to something important. The dog had been restless all morning, pacing around Marcus's house and occasionally stopping to stare out the window toward the mountains in the distance. You know, don't you, boy? Marcus said, scratching behind Rex's ears. You can smell it on the wind. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A retired forest ranger named Bill Morrison called the tip line after seeing the news coverage about Walsh. I remember that guy, Bill told Marcus over the phone. This would have been late 80s, early 90s. He had some kind of permit for a research facility way back in the woods, called it a therapeutic camp for disturbed children. I always thought it was odd, that deep in the forest, no proper road access, no phone lines running out there. Do you remember where exactly? Sure do. It's about 15 miles northeast of the main ranger station, up an old logging road that's been abandoned for decades. You'd need four-wheel drive to get anywhere close, and even then you'd have to hike the last few miles. Bill paused, and Marcus could hear the regret in his voice. I should have paid more attention back then. Sometimes I'd see lights up there at night, or hear vehicles moving around when there shouldn't have been any activity. But Walsh always had his paperwork in order, and his permits were signed by people way above my pay grade. Is the facility still there? Far as I know, haven't been up that way in years, but buildings like that don't just disappear. If you're planning to go up there, Officer Reed, be careful. That's rough country, and if Walsh is still operating. Marcus thanked Bill and immediately began planning the operation. This couldn't be a solo mission. They'd need a full tactical team, medical support, and careful coordination with federal authorities. If there were survivors at Walsh's facility, they'd need immediate medical attention and psychological support. But as Marcus studied topographical maps of the Silver Grove area, Rex began behaving strangely. The dog kept bringing Marcus his leash, whining and pacing between the front door and where Marcus sat at his desk. It was the behavior Rex displayed when he knew they needed to get somewhere important, fast. "What is it, boy? What are you trying to tell me?" Rex ran to the window and began barking. Not his usual alert bark, but something desperate and urgent. Marcus looked outside and saw nothing unusual, but Rex's agitation was increasing by the minute. Then Marcus's phone rang. Detective Chen's voice was tight with controlled urgency. "Marcus, we just got a call from the state hospital. An elderly man was brought in an hour ago, found collapsed on a hiking trail near Silver Grove. He's been asking for you specifically." "Harold?" "That's what we think. But Marcus, he's in bad shape. Internal injuries, severe dehydration, and he keeps saying something about the children in the mountain. The doctors aren't sure how much time he has." Marcus looked at Rex, who had gone silent and was staring at him with those intelligent dark eyes. Somehow, the dog had known. "I'm on my way," Marcus said. The drive to the state hospital felt endless, though it only took 20 minutes. Rex sat in the passenger seat, unusually calm now, as if whatever urgent message he'd been trying to convey had been delivered. Harold Webb, or Henry Walsh, lay in the hospital bed looking far older than his 73 years. His face was gaunt, his breathing labored, and his eyes held the haunted look of a man carrying decades of terrible secrets. "Officer Reed," Harold whispered when Marcus approached the bed, "you came. Why did you ask for me, Harold? Or should I call you Henry?" A bitter smile crossed Harold's lips. "You know then, I suppose I always knew this day would come. Your dog. He knew what I was the moment he smelled me. Animals can sense evil, can't they?" Marcus pulled a chair close to the bed, Rex settling beside him. "Where are they, Henry? Where are the children?" "Still there," Harold whispered, his voice barely audible. "After all these years, they're still there. I tried to go back, but I'm too old, too weak. The guilt finally caught up with me." "Where is there, Henry? We need coordinates, directions, something to help us find them." Harold's eyes filled with tears. "The mountain facility. 15 miles up the old mining road from Silver Grove Station. But it's not what you think. They're not children anymore." A chill ran down Marcus's spine. "What do you mean?" "The experiments, the conditioning. We broke them, Officer Reed. We broke their minds so completely that they forgot who they used to be. Some of them have been there for 30 years, maybe more. They don't know their real names, don't remember their families. We made them into something else." Harold's breathing became more labored, but he continued speaking with desperate urgency. "There's a man there, calls himself the caretaker now. He was one of the first children we took, back in 1981. Tommy Rivers. We did things to his mind that no child should endure. But he survived, and eventually he became our assistant. He's been taking care of the others all these years. Not working with us, protecting them. The other survivors. When the main operation shut down, when the political pressure got too hot, we abandoned the mountain facility, left the children there to fend for themselves. Tommy kept them alive, fed them, sheltered them, protected them from the outside world." Harold gripped Marcus's arm with surprising strength. "They're not dangerous, but they're damaged. Deeply damaged. When you find them, you have to understand. They've created their own family up there, their own world. Taking them away from that might destroy what little sanity they have left." "How many?" Marcus asked quietly. 12, maybe 13. I lost count over the years. The youngest would be in his 30s now, the oldest in his 50s. They've lived their entire adult lives hidden in those mountains, forgotten by the world." Harold's eyes began to close, his grip on Marcus's arm loosening. "The access code for the main building is 1907, Tommy's birth year. He never forgot that, even after everything we did to him. And Officer Reed. When you find them, tell Tommy that Harold is sorry. Tell him I never stopped feeling guilty about what we did." Before Marcus could ask any more questions, Harold's breathing became shallow and irregular. Nurses rushed in as the heart monitor began emitting urgent beeps. Within minutes, the man who had carried decades of secrets about missing children slipped into unconsciousness. Marcus stood in the hospital corridor, his mind reeling from what he'd learned. Rex pressed against his leg, offering the comfort of a loyal partner who understood that they were about to face something unprecedented. 12 or 13 adult survivors of childhood trauma, living in isolation for decades under the care of Tommy Rivers, a man who had been broken as a child and rebuilt into something else entirely. How do you prepare for a rescue mission when the people you're rescuing might not want to be rescued? Detective Chen arrived as Harold was being moved to intensive care. "What did he tell you?" she asked. Marcus shared Harold's revelations, watching Chen's expression grow more troubled with each detail. When he finished, they stood in silence for several minutes, both trying to process the magnitude of what they'd learned. "We need to move fast," Chen finally said. "If Harold dies before he can provide more detailed information, Tommy Rivers and the others could be lost forever. But this isn't going to be a typical rescue operation." "What do you mean?" "These aren't kidnapped children waiting to be reunited with their families. These are traumatized adults who have built their own society in isolation. Taking them away from the only stability they've known in decades could do more harm than good." Marcus looked down at Rex, who was watching him with patient intelligence. The dog had started this entire investigation with his refusal to stand down, and now they were on the verge of uncovering one of the most complex criminal operations in the state's history. "So, what do we do?" Marcus asked. "We go up that mountain," Chen said firmly. "We find Tommy Rivers and the others, and then we figure out how to help them without destroying the life they've built for themselves." As they prepared to leave the hospital, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest part of this case was just beginning. Finding the survivors would be challenging enough, but what came after, helping them heal from decades of trauma while respecting their autonomy and choices, would require skills that no police academy had ever taught. Rex seemed to sense his partner's uncertainty. The dog looked up at Marcus and wagged his tail once, a gesture that somehow conveyed absolute confidence in whatever they were about to face together. The mountain was waiting, and with it, answers to questions that had haunted families and investigators for nearly 40 years. But would those answers bring healing or more heartbreak? What do you think they'll find when they reach the mountain facility? And do you believe Tommy Rivers can ever be truly free? The expedition to Silver Grove National Forest began at dawn on Friday morning. Marcus sat in the passenger seat of Detective Chen's SUV, studying topographical maps while Rex dozed in the back seat. Behind them, a convoy of vehicles carried federal agents, paramedics, social workers, and specialists in trauma psychology. Everyone understood they were heading into uncharted territory, literally and figuratively. Dr. Amanda Foster, a psychiatrist who specialized in severe childhood trauma, had joined the team at the last minute. She rode in the vehicle behind them, reviewing what little information they had about the survivors' mental state. "The key thing to understand," Dr. Foster had explained during the briefing, "is that these individuals have likely developed their own coping mechanisms and social structure. After 30-plus years of isolation, their reality is completely different from ours. We can't just walk in there and expect them to adapt to the outside world overnight." Marcus appreciated her expertise, but he was more concerned with immediate safety. They had no idea what kind of defensive measures Tommy Rivers might have established over the decades. A man who had survived Harold's experiments and kept other survivors alive for 30 years was not someone to underestimate. The convoy reached the abandoned ranger station at 8:30 a.m. From there, they would have to travel on foot, following an overgrown logging road that hadn't seen regular use since the 1980s. The lead federal agent, Special Agent Rodriguez, distributed communication equipment and reviewed safety protocols one final time. "Remember, we don't know what we're walking into," Rodriguez said, addressing the 20-person team. "These people have been living in isolation for decades. They might see us as a threat, or they might not understand our intentions. Let the specialists do the talking, and nobody makes any sudden moves." Rex seemed energized by the mountain air and the sense of purpose that surrounded the expedition. As they began the hike up the abandoned logging road, the dog took point, his nose working constantly to read the scents carried on the morning breeze. The first few miles were relatively easy walking, but as they climbed higher into the mountains, the road became increasingly difficult to follow. Fallen trees blocked the path, and dense undergrowth had reclaimed large sections. It was clear that no vehicles had used this route in years. About 5 miles in, Rex suddenly stopped and raised his head, ears pricked forward. Marcus held up a hand to halt the column behind them. "What is it, boy?" Marcus whispered. Rex sniffed the air carefully, then began moving off the main path toward a cluster of pine trees. Hidden among the trees was a small wooden structure, little more than a lean-to, but clearly built by human hands. Agent Rodriguez approached cautiously, weapon drawn but pointed down. Inside the shelter, they found supplies, canned food, bottled water, basic medical supplies, and several pieces of clothing in various sizes. Everything was neatly organized and relatively fresh. "Supply cache," Rodriguez said quietly. "Someone's been maintaining this." Dr. Foster examined the clothing. These sizes range from medium to extra large. They're not just supplying one person, this is for a group. Marcus studied the shelter's construction. It was well built and weatherproof, but simple, the work of someone who had learned to be completely self-sufficient. "Tommy's been taking care of them," he said, just like Harold said. They continued up the mountain, finding 2 more supply caches along the way. Each one showed the same careful organization and maintenance. Whoever was running these supply lines had been doing it for a very long time and had developed efficient systems for keeping a group of people fed and clothed in complete isolation. As they climbed higher, the forest grew denser and more remote. The logging road became barely visible, more of a deer path than anything designed for vehicles. Marcus began to understand why Harold's operation had never been discovered. This place was so isolated that even experienced hikers would be unlikely to stumble across it. Rex's behavior changed as they approached the 10-mile mark. The dog became more focused, more alert, occasionally stopping to sniff specific areas along the path. Marcus recognized the signs. They were getting close to something significant. Then they heard it, the sound of chopping wood, echoing through the forest from somewhere ahead. The team immediately went into tactical formation, with Agent Rodriguez and his people taking the lead, while the specialists and medical personnel stayed back. Marcus and Rex moved with the lead group, the dog's expertise too valuable to leave behind. The sound grew louder as they climbed, accompanied by other noises, voices calling to each other, the creak of pulleys or mechanical devices, the everyday sounds of people going about their daily work. Finally, they crested a ridge and saw it. A collection of wooden buildings nestled in a small valley, partially hidden by the natural terrain and deliberately camouflaged with branches and tarps. Smoke rose from several chimneys, and people moved between the buildings with purpose and efficiency. It was like looking at a frontier settlement from another century, completely hidden from the modern world. "My God," Dr. Foster whispered, "they've built an entire community." Through binoculars, Marcus could see the details of the settlement. There were at least 6 substantial buildings, connected by covered walkways. Gardens had been carved out of the forest floor, with neat rows of vegetables and herbs. Solar panels and a small wind turbine provided electricity. A stream ran through the center of the settlement, with what appeared to be a water wheel for additional power. "This isn't some ramshackle survival camp," Agent Rodriguez said, studying the scene. "This is a fully functional, self-sustaining community. They have been planning and building this for decades." Marcus counted at least 8 people moving around the settlement, all adults, all working with the kind of comfortable efficiency that comes from years of established routine. They were dressed practically in work clothes and moved with purpose, but there was something in their body language that spoke of caution and constant awareness of their surroundings. "There," Dr. Foster said, pointing to a figure near the largest building. "That man directing the others. That has to be Tommy Rivers." The man she indicated was tall and lean, probably in his 40s, with graying hair and the weathered appearance of someone who had spent decades doing physical labor outdoors. He moved with authority and confidence, clearly the leader of the group. But there was something in his posture, a hypervigilance, a way of constantly scanning his surroundings, that spoke of someone who had learned never to feel completely safe. "How do we approach this?" Rodriguez asked Dr. Foster. "We can't just walk down there and announce ourselves." "Actually, that might be exactly what we need to do," Dr. Foster replied. "These people have been hiding for 30 years. They have probably developed very sophisticated early warning systems. They might already know we're here." As if to prove her point, Activity in the settlement suddenly stopped. People began moving toward the buildings with quick, practiced efficiency. Within minutes, the settlement appeared to be deserted, though Marcus was sure they were all still there, watching from concealment. Definitely military-style discipline, Rodriguez observed. Tommy's taught them how to disappear fast. Marcus looked down at Rex, who was watching the settlement intently, but showed no signs of aggression or alarm. If anything, the dog seemed curious and alert, the way he got when he was working a complex scent trail. "I think I should go down first," Marcus said. Alone, except for Rex. Less threatening than a whole team, and if Harold was right about Tommy remembering his childhood, seeing a police dog might trigger positive memories instead of defensive ones. Dr. Foster nodded slowly. "That could work. But Marcus, you need to understand. Tommy Rivers has been the protector and leader of these people for 3 decades. He's not going to trust easily, and he's certainly not going to let anyone threaten the family he's built." What do I say to him? The truth. That Harold sent us, that Harold is dying, and that we're here because we want to help, not to force anyone to leave. Agent Rodriguez was clearly uncomfortable with the plan. If something goes wrong down there, if they're hostile, we won't be able to get to you quickly. "Rex will warn me if there's danger," Marcus said, confidence in his partner's abilities overriding his own nervousness. "And if Tommy really is taking care of traumatized survivors, he's not going to hurt someone who comes in peace." Marcus began the descent into the valley alone, Rex at his side. The settlement remained eerily quiet, but he could feel eyes watching from every building. Halfway down the slope, a voice called out from the largest building, "That's far enough." Marcus stopped and raised his hands to show he was unarmed. "Tommy Rivers, my name is Officer Marcus Reed. Harold Webb sent me." A long silence followed. Then the voice came again, closer this time. "Harold's dead." "Not yet, but he's dying. He told me where to find you. He wanted me to tell you he's sorry." Another silence, longer this time. Marcus waited patiently, Rex sitting calmly beside him. The dog's relaxed posture was probably communicating more than any words could. If Rex wasn't alarmed, then Marcus posed no immediate threat. Finally, a man emerged from behind one of the buildings. He was indeed the person they had identified as Tommy Rivers, tall, lean, weathered by decades of outdoor living. His eyes were intelligent but guarded, and he moved with the careful precision of someone who had learned to control every aspect of his environment. "Why are you here?" Tommy asked, stopping about 20 feet away. "Because Harold told us about the others, about what happened to all of you, about how you've been taking care of them all these years." Tommy's expression didn't change, but Marcus saw a slight tremor in his hands. "We don't need taking care of. We take care of ourselves." "I can see that," Marcus said, gesturing at the settlement around them. "You've built something incredible here. But Tommy, there are people out there who never stopped looking for you, families who never stopped hoping." "Families?" Tommy's voice was bitter. "I don't have a family. None of us do. Our families are here, with each other." Rex suddenly stood and took a few steps toward Tommy, tail wagging slightly. Tommy's eyes widened as he focused on the dog for the first time. "He's beautiful," Tommy said softly. "German Shepherd?" "Yes. His name is Rex. He's the one who figured out Harold was lying about who he was. Dogs can sense things we miss." Tommy took a step closer, and Rex met him halfway. The man knelt down and extended his hand, letting Rex sniff before gently scratching behind the dog's ears. For the first time since they had arrived, Tommy's expression softened. "We had a dog once," Tommy said quietly. "When I was little, before everything changed. His name was Bruno. He looked just like this one." Marcus felt his heart clench. Harold's experiments had stolen so much from these people, but somewhere deep inside, the 7-year-old boy who had loved a dog named Bruno was still there. "Tommy, I'm not here to force anyone to leave, but there are doctors now who understand trauma in ways they didn't back then. There are treatments, therapies, ways to heal that didn't exist when you were children." Tommy stood up, his hand still resting on Rex's head. "And what about the others? What about people who can't handle the outside world, who panic if they're away from familiar places? What happens to them in your treatments?" It was a valid question, and Marcus didn't have an easy answer. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I know that hiding up here forever isn't the answer either. You've all survived something horrible, but surviving isn't the same as living." "Isn't it?" Tommy's voice was challenging now. "We grow our own food, generate our own power, take care of each other when we're sick or hurt. We have work that gives our lives meaning, relationships that matter to us. How is that not living? Marcus looked around at the settlement, at the evidence of years of careful planning and hard work. Tommy was right. They had built a life here, a good life in many ways. But it was also a life built on hiding, on fear of the outside world. Because you are still prisoners, Marcus said gently. Harold may be dead, but you're still living like he might come back any day. You're still letting what he did to you control how you live. Tommy's face hardened. Harold doesn't control anything anymore. I do. Then prove it, Marcus said. Come down to the outside world, just for a day. Bring whoever you want with you. See what's changed, see what's possible. If you don't like it, if it's too much, you come back here and we never bother you again. And if we don't want to come at all, then you don't come. This is your choice, Tommy. It's always been your choice. Harold took that away from you when you were 7 years old, but you're not 7 anymore. Tommy looked down at Rex, who was sitting patiently between the two men. The dog's presence seemed to be a calming influence on everyone in the conversation. There are 13 of us, Tommy said finally, not counting me. Some of them have never left this mountain as adults. The thought of going to the outside world terrifies them. Then they don't have to go, Marcus said. But maybe some of them want to try. Maybe some of them are ready for something different. Tommy was quiet for a long time, his hand absently stroking Rex's head. Marcus could see him weighing options, considering possibilities he probably hadn't allowed himself to think about in years. I'll talk to them, Tommy said finally, but I won't force anyone to do anything they don't want to do. We've had enough of that for several lifetimes. That's all I'm asking, Marcus said. Tommy looked up at the ridge where the rest of the team was waiting. How many people did you bring? 20, but most of them are doctors and social workers, people who want to help. Only a few are law enforcement, and they're here for security, not to arrest anyone. And they'll leave if I ask them to? Yes, Marcus said, hoping he was telling the truth. Tommy nodded slowly. Give me an hour to talk to my people. Then you can bring 3 others down here, the psychiatrist, 1 federal agent, and 1 medical doctor. No one else until we decide what we want to do. As Marcus climbed back up to rejoin the team, Rex trotting beside him, he felt a mixture of hope and apprehension. They'd made contact, which was more than he'd dared to hope for. But the real challenge was just beginning. How do you help people heal from trauma when their survival has depended on staying hidden from the world that failed to protect them? Do you think Tommy will convince the others to trust the outside world, or will fear keep them trapped on the mountain forever? An hour later, Marcus descended back into the valley, accompanied by Dr. Foster, Agent Rodriguez, and Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the team's medical specialist. Rex walked beside Marcus, his calm presence serving as a bridge between 2 worlds that had been separated for decades. This is Linda, Tommy said, gesturing to the woman. She's been here since 1987, and this is David. He came to us in '94 when he was just 12. Dr. Foster stepped forward carefully. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us. I'm Dr. Amanda Foster. I specialize in helping people who have experienced severe trauma. Linda studied Dr. Foster with intelligent but wary eyes. What kind of trauma? She asked. Her voice was soft but steady, the voice of someone who had learned to be cautious with strangers. The kind that happens to children who are taken from their families and hurt by people who were supposed to protect them, Dr. Foster replied honestly. The kind that leaves lasting scars, but scars that can heal with the right support. David shifted nervously, staying close to Tommy. Marcus noticed that the younger man's eyes never stopped moving, constantly scanning for potential threats. Classic hypervigilance, a survival mechanism that had probably kept him alive but must make normal interactions exhausting. David has difficulty with new people, Tommy explained protectively. He doesn't remember much from before he came here, but crowds and unfamiliar faces can trigger panic attacks. Dr. Mitchell, the medical doctor, spoke gently. That's completely understandable, David. Trauma affects everyone differently. Would it be okay if I asked how you've all been managing medically up here? Any ongoing health issues or concerns? Tommy and Linda exchanged glances. We've learned to take care of most things ourselves, Linda said. Tommy studied every medical book we could get our hands on over the years. We've handled broken bones, infections, even emergency surgeries when we had to. Linda nearly died from appendicitis 8 years ago, Tommy added. I had to operate with nothing but books for guidance and basic surgical tools we'd managed to acquire. She survived, but he trailed off, the weight of that responsibility clear in his voice. Dr. Mitchell's expression was a mixture of admiration and concern. That's incredible that you were able to save her life. But Tommy, you shouldn't have to carry that kind of responsibility alone. There are medical facilities now, trauma-informed hospitals that understand what you've all been through. And what happens when we're in these hospitals? David spoke for the first time, his voice barely above a whisper. What happens when the panic attacks start, when we can't handle being around strangers? Do they strap us down? Give us drugs to make us compliant? The pain in his question revealed everything about what these people had endured. Dr. Foster knelt down to David's eye level, her voice gentle but firm. David, I can't promise that seeking help will be easy, but I can promise that you would never be forced to do anything against your will. You would have advocates, people whose job is to protect your rights and make sure you're treated with dignity and respect. Rex, who had been sitting quietly beside Marcus, suddenly stood and walked over to David. The young man tensed initially, but Rex simply sat down near him, close enough to offer comfort, but not so close as to feel threatening. David looked down at the dog with wonder. "He's beautiful," he said softly. "I used to dream about having a dog when I was little, before Harold brought me here." "His name is Rex," Marcus said. "He's the one who figured out that Harold was lying about who he was. In a way, Rex is the reason we found you." Tommy looked at Marcus with surprise. "Your dog exposed Harold?" Marcus explained how Rex had reacted to Harold's jacket, the chemical scents that had led to the investigation, and how the dog's instincts had unraveled decades of carefully constructed lies. "Animals know," Linda said quietly. "They can sense things about people that we miss. We've had wild animals here over the years, deer, fox, even a black bear once. They weren't afraid of us. It's like they knew we weren't a threat." Agent Rodriguez had been listening quietly, but now he spoke up. "Tommy, I need to ask about legal issues. Officially, you've all been missing persons for decades. There are procedures we need to follow, paperwork that has to be filed, but I want you to know that none of you are in trouble. You're victims, not criminals." Tommy's jaw tightened. "Victims, I hate that word." "Why?" Dr. Foster asked. "Because victims are helpless, powerless. We're not victims anymore. We're survivors. We built this place, created our own family, learned to take care of ourselves and each other. We're not the broken children Harold left behind." Dr. Foster nodded slowly. "You're absolutely right. Survivors is a much better word, and what you've built here is remarkable. But Tommy, being a survivor doesn't mean you have to keep surviving alone." Tommy was quiet for a moment, his hand absently stroking Rex's head. The dog had moved closer to him during the conversation, and Tommy seemed to draw comfort from the contact. "Can I show you something?" Tommy asked finally. He led them to the largest building, which turned out to be a workshop and common area. The walls were covered with artwork, paintings, drawings, wood carvings, and crafts of incredible beauty and complexity. Some pieces depicted the natural beauty of the mountains, but others showed darker themes. Children in cages, faceless authority figures, scenes of fear and isolation. "Art therapy," Linda explained. "Tommy found books about it years ago. He said if we couldn't talk about what happened to us, maybe we could draw it, paint it, carve it into wood, get it out of our heads and onto something we could control." Marcus studied a particular painting that made his heart ache. It showed a small boy sitting alone in a dark room, but through a window in the painting, sunlight streamed in, and in that light was the silhouette of a dog. "David painted that one," Tommy said, noticing Marcus's attention. 3 years ago, when he finally started remembering pieces of his life before Harold. David stepped closer to his painting, his voice stronger now. "I remembered having a dog when I was very little, before my parents died, before the foster homes, before Harold. His name was Rusty, and he used to sleep on my bed every night. I felt safe with him." Rex seemed to sense the emotion in David's voice. The dog walked over and gently pressed against David's leg, offering the same kind of comfort that Rusty had provided decades earlier. "This is what I mean," Dr. Foster said softly. "The healing you've done here, the family you've created, the art and therapy, it's incredible. But imagine what you could accomplish with additional resources, with access to modern treatment methods, with the ability to connect with the outside world on your own terms." And if the outside world rejects us, Linda asked, if people see us as freaks, as damaged goods, if we can't handle the noise, the crowds, the constant stimulation of modern life? Dr. Mitchell answered this time. Then you come back here. This place, this community you've built, it doesn't have to disappear. But you could have choices. You could have access to medical care when you need it, educational opportunities, the chance to share your art with people who would understand and appreciate it. Tommy looked around at his artwork, at the evidence of 3 decades of healing and growth. There are others, he said finally, 10 more people in the other buildings. Some of them have never spoken to an outsider since they arrived. Some of them can't handle any change in routine without having complete breakdowns. How do we explain to them that the world might be ready to accept them when it never was before? One step at a time, Dr. Foster said. We don't have to solve everything today. Maybe we start with just you, or just you and Linda. Maybe you visit the outside world for a few hours, see how it feels, and then come back and share that experience with the others. Agent Rodriguez pulled out a tablet and showed them some news articles. The world has changed, Tommy. When you were children, people didn't understand trauma the way they do now. There are laws protecting victims of crimes, support systems for survivors, public awareness about child trafficking and abuse. What happened to you couldn't happen the same way today. Tommy scrolled through the articles, his expression shifting as he read about modern approaches to trauma treatment, survivor advocacy programs, and successful prosecutions of child trafficking networks. Harold's dead, Agent Rodriguez continued. The people who protected him, who allowed his operation to continue, most of them are dead or in prison. The political connections, the financial networks that kept him safe, they don't exist anymore. David had been studying the tablet over Tommy's shoulder. There are other people, he said quietly. Other people like us who got help and got better. Thousands of them, Dr. Foster confirmed. Survivors who have gone on to live full, meaningful lives. Some of them become advocates, helping other survivors. Some become artists, teachers, parents. Some choose to live quietly, focusing on their own healing. There's no right or wrong way to be a survivor. Linda wiped tears from her eyes. I had a sister, she said suddenly, before Harold took me. Her name was Carol, and she was 3 years older than me. I used to wonder if she ever looked for me, if she ever thought about what happened to her little sister. Dr. Foster reached into her briefcase and pulled out a file. Linda Morrison, taken from a foster home in 1987 when you were 14. Your sister Carol has been looking for you for 36 years. She's a teacher now, married with 3 children. She never stopped believing you were alive somewhere. Linda collapsed into a chair, sobbing. Tommy immediately moved to comfort her, but his own eyes were filled with tears. She looked for me, Linda whispered. She organized search parties, hired private investigators when she could afford it, contacted every missing persons organization in the country. Carol Morrison Stevens has never given up hope of finding her sister. Rex approached Linda and gently placed his head on her knee, offering the comfort of a therapy dog without any formal training. Linda buried her face in the dog's fur, her tears soaking into his coat. I want to see her, Linda said through her tears. I want to see Carol, but I'm so scared. What if she's disappointed in who I became? What if I can't handle being around her family, around children? What if she's just grateful to have her sister back? Dr. Foster countered gently. What if she doesn't care about anything except the fact that you survived? Tommy looked around at the buildings that housed the rest of their community. I need to talk to the others. This decision affects all of us, not just Linda and me. Of course, Marcus said. Take all the time you need. We'll wait. Tommy stood up and walked to the center of the common area. He cupped his hands around his mouth and called out in a voice that carried across the entire settlement. Family meeting, main building, everyone. Over the next few minutes, people began emerging from the other buildings and making their way to the workshop. Marcus counted 13 individuals total, ranging in age from their early 30s to their late 50s. Some moved confidently, others hesitantly. All of them studied the 4 visitors with varying degrees of curiosity and suspicion. Tommy introduced each person by name and the year they had arrived at the mountain. The stories were heartbreaking. Children taken from foster homes, runaways picked up off the streets, kids from broken families who had no one to report them missing. Harold's network had been thorough and systematic, targeting the most vulnerable children in society. But looking at these people now, Marcus saw something Harold had never intended to create. He saw a family. Not a traditional family, but a group of people who had chosen to care for each other, to build something positive from the ruins of their childhood trauma. The outside world wants to help us, Tommy's explained to the group. They have doctors who understand what we went through, lawyers who can protect our rights, and they've found families, real families, who never stopped looking for some of us. The reactions were mixed. Some people looked hopeful, others terrified. A few began crying, overwhelmed by the possibility of reconnecting with lost relatives. "What if we don't want to leave?" asked a woman named Sarah, who had arrived in 1989 when she was 10 years old. "What if this is our home and we want to stay here?" "Then you stay," Dr. Foster said firmly. "Nobody is going to force anyone to do anything. This is about giving you choices you didn't have before." "What about Tommy?" asked a man named Michael. "If Tommy leaves, who takes care of us?" It was the question that cut to the heart of everything. For 30 years, Tommy Rivers had been the leader, protector, and caretaker of this community. The thought of him leaving clearly terrified some of the more vulnerable members. Tommy looked around at the faces of people who had become his family, his responsibility, his entire world. Marcus could see the weight of that responsibility in his eyes, the impossible choice between his own healing and his duty to protect others. "I won't abandon anyone," Tommy said finally. "If some of us choose to explore the outside world, we'll do it together. And we'll always have this place to come back to. This will always be our home." Rex, who had been moving quietly through the group, letting people pet him, and drawing smiles from even the most anxious individuals, suddenly stopped in front of a woman, sitting alone in the corner. She was probably in her 40s, with dark hair and a face that might have been beautiful if not for the deep sadness in her eyes. The woman looked at Rex with wonder, then began to cry. "Bruno," she whispered. "Is that you, Bruno?" Tommy's face went white. "Maria, that's not Bruno. Bruno died a long time ago." "I know," Maria said, reaching out to touch Rex's face. "But he looks just like Bruno, just like my brother's dog from before." She looked up at Tommy with sudden clarity in her eyes. "Tommy? Tommy Rivers? You're my little brother Tommy." The silence that followed was absolute. Tommy stared at Maria as if seeing a ghost, his face cycling through disbelief, recognition, and overwhelming emotion. "Maria," Tommy's voice was barely a whisper. "You were here? You were here all along?" "They told me you were dead," Maria sobbed. "Harold told me my little brother was dead, that it was my fault for not taking care of you better. I've been grieving you for 36 years. Tommy crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled his sister into his arms. The reunion was raw and desperate, 2 people finding each other after decades of believing they were alone in the world. Rex sat beside them, tail wagging gently, as if he understood that he had helped heal something that had been broken for far too long. "We're going to the outside world," Tommy said finally, his voice strong and certain for the first time since the visitors had arrived. "All of us who want to. We're going to find our families, get the help we need, and show the world that survivors can heal." The vote was unanimous. Even the most frightened members of the community agreed to at least try visiting the outside world, knowing they could return to their mountain sanctuary if needed. As the sun set over Silver Grove National Forest, Marcus sat with Rex outside the main building, watching the survivors pack for their first journey down the mountain in decades. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, difficult conversations, and the complex process of reintegrating people who had been missing for most of their adult lives. But tonight, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since this all began: hope. Rex looked up at him and wagged his tail, the satisfied expression of a dog who had done his job well. Marcus scratched behind his partner's ears and smiled. "Good boy, Rex. You found them. You found them all." In the distance, Tommy and Maria sat together, looking through old photographs and sharing memories of a childhood that Harold had tried to steal but could never completely destroy. Their laughter carried on the mountain air, the sound of healing beginning at last. What moment in this story affected you the most? Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this message of hope, subscribe for more incredible true stories, and comment below about the power of never giving up on the missing and the lost. The story of Rex, the canine who refused to stand down, had come to an end. But for 13 survivors and their families, a new story of healing and hope was just beginning.